Welcome to the channel, everyone. I hope you enjoy the stories, and thank you for listening. The cabin stood at the edge of the Bladenborough woods, a lonely structure surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. The air was heavy with the smell of earth and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers, typical of a North Carolina summer. My name's Rick Smith, a cook by trade from Boulder, Colorado. I came out here for a break from the kitchen heat, the endless orders. Growing up in Boulder, I'd always been surrounded by the rugged mountains and crisp dry air, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity of this place. The plan was simple, a hunting trip, a chance to test my aim and enjoy the solitude of the wild. I'd driven down in my old restored muscle car, a project I'd been working on for years. It handled the long drive like a dream, a testament of the hours I'd spent fixing it. The cabin was basic but functional, with a small fireplace, a single bed, and a creaky wooden floor. The first day was uneventful. I spent it scouting the area, noting trails and deer tracks in the soft soil. The forest was alive with the buzz of insects and the distant calls of birds. By evening I had a small fire crackling outside the cabin, the flames casting flickering shadows across the clearing. I sat there with a can of beans and a flask of whiskey, staring into the fire and letting my mind drift. That's when the unease began. It started subtle, a shift in the forest rhythm. The crickets fell silent and the birds stopped singing. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I told myself it was nothing. The woods were full of strange noises after all. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The second day was more of the same. I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle slung over my shoulder, and set up a spot near a small stream. The water was clear and cold, and the area seemed perfect for deer. But the same unease followed me, a constant pressure at the back of my mind. I brushed it off, focusing on the task at hand. It was that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that I saw it. I was sitting by the fire again, sharpening my knife, when I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing. At first I thought it was a deer, but as I squinted into the dim light I realized it was something else entirely. A figure crouched behind a tree, partially obscured by the thick trunk. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stared. The firelight flickered, and for a brief moment I caught a glimpse of its eyes, two pinpricks of pale, yellow light that seemed to pierce the darkness. My chest tightened, and I gripped the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer. The figure shifted slightly, its form indistinct but massive. My mind raced through possibilities. Bear maybe, or some lost hiker, but deep down I knew it was neither. I grabbed my rifle and aimed toward the figure. "I'm armed," I shouted. "Show yourself." The thing moved then, slipping behind the tree and disappearing into the shadows. My heart pounded as I scanned the forest, but it was gone. The rest of the night was a blur of paranoia and adrenaline. I locked the cabin door and sat by the window, watching the tree line with my rifle in hand. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, the creak of the cabin, the rustle of leaves, set me on edge. By morning I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there wasn't something I wanted to face alone. I packed my gear quickly, slinging the rifle over my shoulder and slipping a knife into my belt. The walk back to the car was tense, every step accompanied by the feeling of unseen eyes on me. It wasn't until I reached the trailhead that it attacked. The sound came first, a guttural growl that made my blood run cold. I turned just in time to see it charging from the underbrush, a blur of fur and teeth. I fired the rifle, the shot echoing through the forest, but it barely slowed. I ran, crashing through the undergrowth, the creature hot on my heels. My legs burned and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. The trail twisted and turned, and I could hear the thing behind me, its heavy breaths and snapping jaws. Somehow I managed to lose it. I ducked into a thicket, crouching low and trying to steady my breathing. The forest was silent again, but the silence was worse than the noise. I stayed there for what felt like hours, knife in hand, waiting for the thing to find me. When I finally made it back to my car, I didn't look back. I threw my gear into the trunk, started the engine, and tore down the dirt road, my tires kicking up clouds of dust. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? But I've read the stories, the old yellowed newspapers that talk about the beast of Bladenborough. They call it a cryptid, a legend, but I know the truth. It's out there, watching, waiting, and I'll never set foot in those woods again. The cabin was nestled in a remote pocket of Arizona forest, where the ponderosa pines towered high above the ground and was carpeted in wildflowers that signaled spring. The sun blazed down during the day, but the shade of the forest kept things tolerable. Nights were still crisp, the kind of chill that crept under your skin if you lingered too long without a fire. I'm Matt Goodson, a park ranger from Austin, Texas. Back home, life was a balance between duty and my hobby, painting and playing Warhammer 40k. Sometimes I'd bring miniatures into the field, painting the intricate detail under a headlamp while listening to the hum of the wilderness. This trip wasn't about hobbies though. It was a break from responsibility, a chance to enjoy the camaraderie of old friends and the thrill of the hunt. We were a group of four: me, Andy, Joel, and Trevor. Trevor, the organizer, had found the cabin on some forum and was insisted it was perfect for hunting mule deer. The place was rustic, with creaking wooden planks and a fireplace that had clearly seen better days. We arrived in high spirits, unloading our rifles and gear before settling in. The first day went by without much excitement. The forest seemed almost too still, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. We chalked it up to the isolation. No bustling hikers or chatty tourists to disturb the peace. By the second day, however, the sense of quiet had turned oppressive. Andy commented on it first as we walked a trail near Shallow Creek. "Doesn't it feel dead out here?" he muttered, scanning the undergrowth. Trevor laughed it off. "Maybe you're just scared of silence, Andy." Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I'd read plenty of wilderness magazines during downtime at the station, some of which detailed strange occurrences in places like this. Arizona's forests were home to lore, including stories of skinwalkers and other beasts best left unnamed. I hadn't believed them then, but as the hours dragged on, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I cared to admit. That evening, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows that stretched like claws over the forest floor. We gathered around the fire, its warmth cutting through the cold. Joel, ever the joker, spun a tale about cryptids he claimed roamed the southwest. His exaggerated delivery had us laughing, but something in his tone felt forced, like he was trying to distract himself from the same unease we all felt. It was then that Trevor noticed it. "Hey," he said, his voice tight. "What's that?" We followed his gaze to the tree line. At first I saw nothing, but then I caught it, a faint movement, the suggestion of something crouched, low and still. My stomach tightened. The shape didn't belong to any deer or coyote I'd ever seen. We froze, the crackling fire the only sound. The shape shifted slightly, just enough to catch the light of the fire. Pale eyes glinted back at us, and my blood turned to ice. "What the hell is that?" Joel whispered, gripping his rifle. No one answered. Trevor stood, his hand on his knife. "It's watching us," he said, barely audible. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, staring at the thing as it stared back. Finally, it melted back into the shadows, vanishing so smoothly it was as if it had never been there. The atmosphere shuddered. Joel swore loudly, breaking the tension. "I don't like this, man. I don't like this at all." Trevor tried to play it cool, but his hands shook as he stoked the fire. "It's probably just a mountain lion," he said, though his tone betrayed him. We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we kept the fire blazing, taking turns watching the tree line. By morning, we were all on edge, but we decided to stay. It was just nerves, we told ourselves. We'd come out here to hunt, and we weren't going to be scared off by shadows. The following evening, as the sun set in a fiery blaze, The creature came back. This time it didn't stay hidden. It darted between the trees, fast and deliberate, circling the clearing. I caught glimpses of it, a tall, lanky figure, its movements unnervingly fluid. When it attacked, it was a blur of violence. Trevor went down first, knocked off his feet by something that struck him like a freight train. Blood sprayed across the dirt as he screamed, the sound cut short by a sickening crunch. Andy and Joel fired wildly, their shots echoing through the forest, but the thing was too fast. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing my rifle and making for the trail. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush, the creature's guttural growls close behind. Joel tripped, and Andy stopped to pull him up, the creature's shadow looming just feet away. I fired blindly into the dark, and for a moment the growling stopped. We didn't waste the reprieve. Together we sprinted towards the dirt road where our truck was parked. I could feel it watching us, stalking just beyond the edge of my vision. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. When we reached the truck, Joel fumbled with the keys, his hands slick with sweat and blood. Andy and I kept our rifles trained on the tree line, but the creature didn't show itself again. We piled into the truck and Joel gunned the engine, the tires spinning before we tore down the road. None of us spoke as we drove back to town. Trevor was gone, and the reality of it was beginning to sink in. Back in Austin, I'd returned to the safety of routine, painting miniatures, cooking meals, but I'd carried the memory of that night forever. The magazines hadn't done it justice. Whatever is out there, it wasn't just a story. It was real, and it was hunting. The cabin was small and weather-beaten, perched on the edge of a frozen lake deep in Michigan's wilderness. The snow-covered woods pressed in on all sides, their skeletal branches twisting in the biting wind. The trip was supposed to be peaceful, a chance to fish in solitude and get away from the grind of Detroit. The streets there had their own kind of danger, but I had traded that for this icy expanse, where silence carried a different kind of menace. I'm Sylvester, and I've spent most of my adult life in MMA. There's a rhythm to fighting that I appreciate, a kind of brutal artistry. Fishing is where I find my balance. Growing up, my father and I would cast our lines into the Detroit River, talking about everything and nothing as we waited for the fish to bite. Those memories had drawn me here, but as I stood on the porch of the cabin, staring into the stormy twilight, I felt a prickle of unease. The snow began falling again, thick and heavy. The lake was a sheet of ice, its surface reflecting the pale, fading light of the day. I set up my gear near the shore, cutting a hole in the ice and lowering my line into the frigid water. The sound of the storm grew louder, a howling wind that echoed through the forest. By the time night fell, I'd caught nothing but the chill. I trudged back to the cabin, my boots crunching in the snow. Inside, the fire crackled weakly in the stone hearth. I piled on more wood and sat close to the flames, trying to warm my hands. My phone had no signal this far out, but that was the point, wasn't it? No distractions, no interruptions, just me and the wilderness. The hours passed slowly. The wind outside rattled the windows and shadows danced on the walls. I had a stack of magazines with me, most of them about fishing, but one caught my attention. It was an old issue with an article about cryptids, creatures that supposedly lurked in the woods and mountains of North America. Michigan had its fair share of legends, including tales of the dogman, a hulking beast with a man's body and a wolf's head. I dismissed it as a folklore back then, something to laugh about with friends over beers. But alone in the woods, the stories felt different. I heard the first noise around midnight, a low guttural sound that carried over the wind. At first I thought it was the storm playing tricks on my ears. Then came the thud of something heavy moving outside. My breath caught and froze, listening. Another thud, then a scraping sound, like claws on wood. I grabbed the knife I'd kept by my side and moved to the window. The storm made it hard to see. but I thought I caught movement near the edge of the trees, something tall, upright. The door rattled suddenly, and I stumbled back, heart pounding. The sound stopped just as quickly as it started, leaving only the howling wind. I stayed awake the rest of the night, knife in hand, jumping at every creak and groan of the cabin. At dawn, I ventured outside. Tracks led from the forest to the cabin and back again, deep impressions in the snow. They were larger than any animal tracks I'd seen before, and oddly shaped, like a mix of paw and foot. I decided I couldn't stay another night. Packing my gear, I planned to hike back to the trailhead and drive to the nearest town, but as I stepped into the clearing, the forest fell eerily silent. No wind, no birds, just a suffocating stillness. The attack came without warning. Something slammed into me, knocking me into the snow. I barely caught a glimpse of it, a blur of fur, claws, and teeth before it vanished into the trees. Pain lanced through my shoulder where its claws had raked me, scrambled to my feet, blood staining the snow. I ran. The thing stalked me, its movements almost playful. It would crash through the underbrush, then retreat, circling me like a predator toying with its prey. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, clutching the knife tightly. The forest seemed endless, each tree identical to the last. The storm picked up again, the wind cutting through my clothes like knives. I slipped on the ice and fell hard, the knife skidding out of reach. It was on me before I could recover, its claws pinning me down. I struggled, landing a solid punch that gave me just enough time to grab a branch and swing it with all my strength. The creature let out a guttural snarl and backed off, giving me the chance to run again. Finally, I saw the lights of a village through the trees. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself forward, crashing into the first house I reached. The locals took me in, their faces pale as I told them what happened. "You're lucky to be alive," one of them said. "This forest, it's got stories, things better left alone." They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any answers. All I knew was that I would never return to those woods. The cabin was a simple structure, half hidden by a canopy of vibrant autumn leaves in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that seeps through flannel and nips at your skin, but it was peaceful, a retreat from the chaos of work and the constant hum of city life. My name's Sam, and I'm a postman from Knoxville. I'd taken the weekend off to hunt, bringing my dog Rex along for the trip. Rex was a mutt, part shepherd, part something else, but his loyalty was unmatched. He sat on the porch beside me, his ears swiveling to catch every rustle in the woods. The forest here was dense, painted with hues of orange and red, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer with each passing hour. Knoxville isn't far, but it feels like another world compared to this solitude. My neighbors there were friendly enough, always asking about their mail and chatting about their lives. I'd spent many evenings working on my car in the driveway, enjoying the rhythm of tinkering with the engine. But out here, the only sounds were the wind and the occasional call of a distant bird. By mid-afternoon, I decided to head out for a hunt. Rex trotted beside me, his nose low to the ground. The forest smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves. I carried my rifle slung over my shoulder, a knife strapped to my belt. The day passed uneventfully. I didn't see a single deer, though Rex seemed on edge, his ears pinned back as if he sensed something I couldn't. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the woods into deep shadow, we headed back to the cabin. Storm clouds had rolled in while we were out, and by the time I had a fire going in the cabin's stone heart, the rain began to fall in earnest. It wasn't a gentle rain, but a torrential downpour, with thunder rumbling low in the distance. I fed Rex and sat down with a sandwich, the warmth of the fire fighting off the damp chill that had settled into my bones. The third sign that something was wrong came shortly after dark. Rex, usually calm and relaxed indoors, suddenly stood at attention. His hackles raised. He let out a low growl, staring at the door. I froze, listening. At first there was only the sound of the storm, the rain lashing against the windows. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, faint but unmistakable, coming from the porch. I grabbed my rifle and moved to the window, peeking out into the night. The rain made it hard to see, but for a split second I thought I saw a movement at the edge of the trees. Something tall and angular, not quite man, not quite beast. I locked the door and threw more wood on the fire, the heat doing little to dispel the chill creeping up my spine. Rex continued to growl, his body tense. Then came the sound of footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. No answer. The footsteps stopped, and the silence was worse than the noise. My mind raced as I remembered the YouTube video I'd watched months ago about strange sightings in the mountains. The locals whispered about creatures that stalked the woods, things they claimed were neither human nor animal. At the time, I'd laughed it off as a nonsense. Now, I wasn't so sure. The attack came just before midnight. The door splintered inward, the force of the blow knocking me back. The creature was a blur of movement, its eyes reflecting the firelight like molten gold. It was massive, its claws slicing through the air as it lunged toward me. I fired the rifle, the shot echoing in the small cabin. The creature recoiled, a guttural snarl escaping its throat, but it didn't retreat. Rex leaped at it, barking furiously, his teeth sinking into its arm. The creature howled, shaking him off and slamming him against the wall. "Rex," I screamed, grabbing my knife as the beast turned its attention to me. I slashed at it, the blade cutting deep into its side, black ichor spilling from the wound, the stench of rot filling the air. It knocked me aside with a single swipe, its strength overwhelming. In the chaos, I grabbed Rex, who was still breathing, and bolted out the back door into the storm. The rain was blinding, but I didn't stop running. The creature crashed through the trees behind us, its snarls nearly drowned out by the thunder. We stumbled upon an old hiking trail, the faint outline of a path leading downhill. My lungs burned, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't stop. Rex limped beside me, his determination mirroring my own. The creature was relentless, its shadowy form always behind us. I used the terrain to my advantage, ducking under low-hanging branches and vaulting over fallen logs, hoping to slow it down. Finally, the lights of a small town came into view, their glow like a beacon in the darkness. I burst into the first building I saw, a diner, still open late into the night. The patrons stared as I collapsed onto the floor, soaked and bleeding, with Rex at my side. They helped me, their questions a blur as I struggled to catch my breath. When I tried to explain what had happened, the disbelief on their faces was evident, but one old man sitting at the counter muttered something that sent a chill down my spine. "You're lucky you made it out," he said. "These woods, they've got things in them, things that don't like to be seen." Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a good night.